Yeah, following on nicely from what Pav was talking about, rather than just talking really about responding to the climate emergency, I was just thought I'd share really over the next 20 minutes some of my and others, people that I work with, reflections really on what we're experiencing and maybe some of the things that we're learning from the crisis that we're in and how that can help us to respond to I've titled this climate emergency, but effectively like the challenge that you feel needs your attention. Because lots of these lessons are similar when we're dealing with some of these large crises, whether it's men's work / gender, whether it's what we were hearing about earlier on around mental well-being, whether it's about climate change, ecological emergency, or rising inequality. So I'm not going to spend too long on climate change, but basically it's a big thing. It's probably there's lots of cartoons at the moment showing like the challenge of overcoming coronavirus, and then this massive wave of climate change coming. We don't really debate it anymore about whether it's real or not. It's there, it's happening. But like I said, it can sit alongside the biological emergency, increasing inequality, and gender as well. So as well as seeing the continued impact of climate change in terms of wildfires and extreme weather, we also have this ecological emergency. We've lost half of the animals on the planet in the last 60 or so years, and the last 12 months, pre-corona, our news was kind of covered in the wildfires in Australia and the burning of the Amazon. So we're not really paying attention to the wider kind of systemic planet that we live on a lot of the times, in the way that we live our life on a day-to-day basis. And this is resulting in a human emergency as well. We'll get onto this a little bit. One of the challenges I think that we see is we've always kind of externalized a lot of these big issues. They're not happening to me. This is a kind of an ecological or biological challenge. But climate change is impacting society. Millions of people are already being displaced. It's not a tenuous link, but the way that we're living our lives at the moment as a society is causing disease to spread to new locations, and maybe we're in the middle of one of those incidents now. Human rights are being impacted. And something else that's really come to the fore through coronavirus is that it's usually the most vulnerable that feel the impacts the most. So, but this wasn't about climate change. So I thought this was just a nice opportunity to reflect on what we're seeing come out of the current crisis. So I'm just going to share some of these. Feel free to jump in on the chat, and you can. And if you leave any questions, I'll try and leave some space for Q&A at the end. And if you have any questions, you can just chuck them into the chat, and I'll respond to them once this session has finished. So some of the stuff that's coming out of our experience of lockdown and responding to the pandemic is how we act in the coming months, whether this is as like individuals, as organizations that we work in, or in our local communities. This is going to matter now more than ever, because there's an opportunity here to kind of galvanize the collective mindset and change the voices that we listen to. We've kind of going through a process of like slowing down and resetting and becoming in some ways more present to some of the stuff that maybe matters to us. And so we need to pay attention to that, and pay attention to the voices that we listen to, and pay attention as I can't remember, but the lovely lady who was talking earlier about her son's charity was talking about listening to how we're feeling at the moment, and how we can take those feelings into trying to create maybe a slightly different new normal after this reset. It also feels like we've been experiencing a bit of kind of, I don't know, raising awareness around our kind of the kind of interconnectedness of us all. Yeah, we do live on one planet. We are, part of a big living system. Yet for the last maybe 10, 20, 30, 50 years, we've kind of followed a path of separation. We stare at our computers and our phones. We get very busy in our heads. And that kind of separation or control, which I think probably Adrian will talk about in the next presentation or talk as well, about trying to control nature, about kind of control human spirit. Those are some of the mindsets that got us into this kind of challenging situation in the first place. So maybe it's best that we start to think about the world as the complex, interconnected, finite, ecological, social, psychological, economic system that it is, and that we can't break things down, and interconnectedness and complexity is key. Oops. Another lesson, maybe global challenges like we've seen with the current pandemic, but the same with the biological or climate emergencies, are not respecting national borders. So that ideology that we don't have to worry about climate change, we don't have to respond to it because it's not really affecting me, that bubble has effectively burst. Yeah, no one's geographically immune to coronavirus, and the same is going to be true for climate change. So we need to have collective responses to these kind of forthcoming existential threats. In the same way that we're responding to coronavirus, we need to mobilize on that kind of global scale to solve climate change as well. We need to look at things, I think I said already, in a kind of systemic perspective. Yeah, changes that can only be activated by government or companies, but we need to look at both the behavioral changes that we can make ourselves. We've seen over the past few months that like the kind of global governmental inaction on climate change, that doesn't have to continue. We've seen governments, however, whether they're good, bad, right or wrong, and that's a whole nother presentation, but they can move quickly. You know, these bodies of the state have moved quickly to take radical action. And we've changed our behavior as a result of that. I mean, some of it we like, some of it we don't. But it kind of debunks the myth that we can't create the kind of big systemic, social, economic changes that we need to make to deal with these threats. We can. We've shown that we can, so that can no longer be an excuse, let alone the fact that we've mobilized trillions of dollars, which is what we've said we would never be able to do to deal with climate change. I mean, a lesson that we've heard a lot from Extinction Rebellion over the last few years, listen to the science. So again, another lesson maybe coming out of this is that listening to the science and trying to get through all the misinformation and fake news and political twisting of the message. Let's listen to the science. The science of climate change, science of the biological emergency, the science of rampant growing inequality across the world. Yeah, let's listen to our scientific bodies and respond to the messages that they're saying, which is that we need to take action now and urgently. We need to understand that we can't control nature. We're in control of ourselves and how our own behavior, but we don't really control anything beyond that. And the impacts of the last few months have shown that we are so interconnected with the planet that we live on, both within society, but also in terms of the natural world. And so we've got to stop looking at challenges like climate change as a problem or a challenge of nature to be fixed. Our lives are deeply embedded in the wider ecology of the planet, and we have to start to live more in balance with that. And that's going to mean that we have to let go of stuff. We have to start taking responsibility outside of our immediate sphere of influence of how we live our lives and what we are impacting through those choices that we make every day. I mean, on that theme of evolution and emergence, creating the wonderful natural world that we experience every day, as well as regulating it, like providing the air that we breathe and the water that we drink and the energy that we need to grow the food that we eat and everything else. With complex challenges, as we've seen with, I guess, to some extent with the current pandemic, but especially with climate change, there is not necessarily a manual or a blueprint, a plan to follow. Yeah. So instead of trying to structure and plan and program everything, we need to be happy to experiment, to trial and to see how things emerge. Yeah. Again, as we were saying earlier, listen to your body. What feels right? Step into that question. Yeah. Hold a really strong intention. Yeah. And allow outcomes to merge from living with that intention. Yeah. I mean, we kind of knew human beings are capable of extraordinary things. I think that sometimes these are bad as well. But globally, we've had to face like a pretty significant threat to society. And when we had to step into that new role or respond to it, we saw that we could unite behind that common cause and make sacrifices. Yeah, we've all given up lots. We've given up seeing loved ones and friends, given up stuff that we felt was important, like, I don't know, buying stuff, buying lots of clothes or, whatever. And we've kind of seen a shift, maybe we've achieved a better degree of, I don't know, happiness or fulfillment from the fact that coming together and supporting each other ultimately felt better than kind of looking after ourselves. And to that extent, the virus is kind of holding up a mirror in front of us as it's forcing, I don't know, again, it's because we're slowing down and being more present to ourselves. It's allowing us to kind of become more self-aware, become more conscious, see our own behavior and kind of impact on the collective well-being, on the system. Yeah. And so hopefully we can use that, that kind of inner reflection, that view in the mirror, to make a few personal kind of choices around how we live and how we work. Yeah. And maybe shift some of the drivers that we have from a kind of inner place of me more to the collective kind of we. Yeah. So I think we've seen people acknowledging that there's been a lot of hardship all over the world and it will continue for a long time. But we've seen people understand that leading with compassion and empathy and love, as we talked about before, probably makes people happier than buying another car. So it's kind of time to let go a bit. Yeah. Each disruption, you can say, has two sides. So that some things that we need to let go of, and then the things that, as we talked about earlier, maybe that are about to emerge. Yeah. So if new stuff's coming, we have to let go of some stuff. So we kind of see that on the letting go side, it's interesting to see how we've managed to, I know it's temporary, but it's still feeling quite full on at the moment, but how we've managed to kind of allow stuff to go. Stuff that we felt was really important. Yeah, maybe it's been shown to be a little bit kind of fluid. And suddenly we find that half of the stuff that we filled our lives with, the really busy stuff, the stuff we had to do, wasn't maybe as necessary as we felt after all. So maybe those are some questions. So maybe there are some questions there around. So why do we keep ourselves really busy with all this stuff that isn't essential? So it's a good question to ask ourselves. And if it is time to let go, what if we use this disruption as an opportunity to let go of, the stuff that isn't essential in our lives and in our work and in our massively institutionalized, systemic, whatever, routines, world, economy that we live in. So how might we reimagine how we live and how we work together? So we have personally to me, it feels like we've been given this opportunity to like press that reset button, to start that transition. we're probably never going to have an opportunity like this again. Who knows? That's quite a grand statement, but yeah, if we've been thinking that stuff isn't right in our world, whether it's very personal or whether it's something as big as climate change or inequality, gender, we have an opportunity now and a responsibility to kind of reimagine what we would want our future to look like, and to use the emergent recovery from the current crisis that we're in to make these futures come to life. So we need to choose, we need to kind of opportunity here to choose the future we want, to pause, reset, and step up to some extent. So the coronavirus crisis, like any kind of disruption, essentially is giving us a choice. Like, is it the kind of flight, you know, be fearful, run away from the problem, blame others, deny it, which is what we've done with lots of issues, especially around climate change and the kind of bigger global challenges? Or do we kind of turn towards that challenge, yeah, to support and to comfort those who need help? So it comes kind of back to this choice around acting for the self or acting from, you know, this kind of awareness I think some people are experiencing going through this crisis, that we're part of this bigger interconnected system, this planet. And the more the world kind of moves down that path, which we didn't really explore a lot at the beginning, but of, you know, worse climate change, worse biodiversity loss, greater inequality. If we're not turning into that and looking at what we need to do on a personal level to make it better, then we're effectively part of that problem. So it becomes our responsibility to kind of radiate that presence, compassion, empathy, love, and have that to ground our action.
2 minute warning. 2 minute warning.
Yeah, but on Adam, I'm on it. But so that's it. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I've left 2 minutes if anyone had anything that they wanted to ask.
Round of applause to everybody. Vulnerability is a muscle. The more you use it, the more you practice it, the easier it becomes.